You're sitting on your knees building a fire, quickly growing tired as the smoke-filled air seeps into your lungs and burns your eyes. It's been an hour already, and you've had no luck. Blisters have formed on your hands from attempting to spin the stick for what has seemed like forever, and you have to pull your feet away again as the tiny embers cast from the fire begin to blow in the wind. And all your struggling quickly turns to envy. Your brother would have already finished ages ago. These things just come to him. You purge these useless thoughts and keep attempting to ignite the fire until finally you have enough embers to start blowing. This must be done quick, as the wind could easily blow and stifle the fire. You grab your tender and toss a handful of dead shrubs inside. Then you begin to blow as much air as you can onto the embers, cupping your hands around the fire. Then finally, your pile of shrubs erupts into flames. But you're not done yet. You quickly set your flaming tender on the ground and start putting small sticks on it. If you can't manage to light the wood, all your work would be for nothing. All that time wasted. And you are astonished that the wood is not taking. Panicking, as you're afraid the fire might go out again, you utter to yourself a silent prayer. Then suddenly, the wood begins to catch. You excitedly feed sticks into the fire until you can finally place a large log. And your fire blazes brightly in the night sky. All the hard work is done, and now it's time to rest. And as you relax, you can finally enjoy your hard work. The chill of the desert air descends, and you take your time as you watch the rolling hills and sparse shrubbery of the arid grasslands around you. The tall, dusty mountains seem to stretch up into the heavens, and that's when you notice the dark clouds rolling in behind them. As the distant thunder slowly settles in, you remember the stories that your parents told you of a beautiful place called Eden, where all of their needs were met, and everywhere you looked, there was green as far as the eye could see. Oh, how you wish you could have seen it. With only a few hours left, you begin gathering your food for offerings. You really have had quite a bountiful harvest, and even managed to gather your favorite fruit and vegetables. Rummaging through your bag, you consider what you want to sacrifice for your offering. Here it is. Pulling out a couple vegetables, you settle on some squash and barley. It's your least favorite, so it would be the best to sacrifice. Now, putting it on the altar, the fire quickly brings it ablaze. And once the offering is burned to ashes, kick out the fire and make your way home. But as you are walking away, you can't help but feel guilt in your heart. What you've given is inadequate. You know God's not pleased with you. Returning home, you walk by your younger brother Abel and watch him as he gives his offering. He sacrifices the fattest and juiciest of his flocks to God. The aroma of fine meat lingers in the air. It's no surprise that God's favor showed on him, and on you, just disappointment. Your jealousy and anger overcome you as you storm away from home, and then God begins to speak to you. Why are you angry and downcast, Cain? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. You don't want to hear it. Abel has always been the favored one. Everyone is always proud of Abel. You try hard to grow your food, and you receive no recognition for it just because you want to enjoy the fruits of your labor. And as you think about it, it becomes clear. This is all Abel's fault. If he wasn't always so perfect, then maybe you would have the chance to not be a disappointment. You stop in your tracks as a dark plan begins to form in your mind. The next morning, you go to your brother Abel and ask him to go to the field. He agrees, and together you begin walking towards his flock. As you are walking alongside your brother, you begin to feel your heart beat faster and faster. Sweat drips down your forehead as the hot air suffocates you, constantly having to take breaths due to the anxiety you feel. As Abel struts out in front of you, you catch him whistling a tune. His happiness and confidence only furthers your anger against him. He doesn't feel the stress that you feel. Fate has favored him, both with your parents and God. This cruelness is unbearable, unfair. And as you both get to the field, there is a lamb lying on the ground by itself. It's kicking its back hoof and clearly struggling. And you see some blood dripping from the back of its leg. As it hits the ground, it makes a minor stain in the dirt. Abel quickly kneels down beside it to care for his flock. And of course, the lamb suddenly gets more calm, just with Abel's presence. At that moment, with Abel distracted, you know that this is your one chance. A chance to be better than Abel, to be better than subpar, to end his seeming perfection. As Abel examines the lamb, you take a large rock off the ground and begin to approach him. As you are standing behind him, you raise the rock above your head when Abel turns to you and asks, "Hey, Cain, do you think we should?" He makes eye contact with you, and then you drop the rock.
The new world, with all its power and might, steps forth to the rescue and the liberation of the old.
The Cain and Abel story is profound as it's the first account of humans after the expulsion from Eden. It paints a picture that is really quite depressing for mankind, as we have all been fundamentally changed due to the fall. And now the very heart of mankind is enslaved to the inclination of evil. And this story displays that. Cain is the first child of Adam and Eve, and therefore is the first human made from a natural birth. It says a lot about humanity that the firstborn human was not just a murderer, but a kinslayer. So let's go through the text and analyze it. The text starts with Adam and Eve conceiving their first child, Cain. Once he was born, Eve said, quote, "With the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man." End quote. She then named him Cain, which is a commentary itself on the procreation of humans. The name comes from the Hebrew word kana, which can mean different things. But in this context, it likely means to create or to make. This falls in line with what Eve says at Cain's birth. Because of the grace and forbearance of God, Eve now partook in the creation of her child. In this very next verse, we are told that Eve then bore Abel, and he became a keeper of sheep, while Cain became a tiller of fields. Abel's name tragically comes from the Hebrew word havel, which means nothingness or vanity. Indeed, Abel did become nothingness after his murder, which we will get into later. From here, Genesis tells us of the offerings brought to God by the two brothers. It reads, quote, "In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." End quote. So in the third verse, we see that the description of the offering Cain brought to the Lord is very minimal as compared to the one in verse 4 that gives more detail into Abel's offering. Therefore, it's not surprising that God looked at Abel's with favor, as he was more devout in his offerings. But verses 6 through 7 show again that God is not arbitrary. And this next conversation between God and Cain highlights the massive theological question: to what extent does sin and evil affect the hearts of human beings? And this debate has raged on for thousands of years because it fundamentally transforms how men should view their relationship to a holy and just God. To make it even more difficult, consensus on the translation of this passage is, again, not only split between Christians and Jews, but between Jews themselves. In the classical Christian interpretations, God commands Cain to rule over sin. For example, King James Version, "Thou shalt rule over him." New International, "You must rule over it." American Standard, "But do thou rule over it." And this is the same for many Orthodox Jews, as the Orthodox Jewish Bible states, quote, "Thou must rule over it," end quote. Meanwhile, on the other side of the debate, such as found in the complete Jewish Bible, the passage states, quote, "You can rule over it," end quote. So what's the difference? Why does it matter if it's a command or not? It matters because it helps us assess mankind's capacity to do good on their own. If the passage truly reads, quote, "You can rule over it," end quote, then although we know that evil is inherent in human beings, it's not absolute. However, if it's a command, the purpose is that it proclaims God's standard of holiness, and when contrasted with mankind, reveals our radical depravity and inability. That the inherent evil in mankind has polluted our entire existence. So, why are there so many different translations to this passage? Well, this discrepancy in theology exists because of the method of translation. Upon inquiry, we found that many modern Jewish and Christian sects shape their translation of difficult passages in the Bible by their theology. Of course, this method of translation is a vicious type of circular logic, as the meaning of the text becomes a reflection of what you want to believe rather than what it actually says. If we really want to understand the difficult passages of the Bible and the ancient Hebrews, the only reliable method of translation is the text itself. Are there other clearer areas in the Old Testament where the Bible describes the human condition? Well, let's take a look. Isaiah 64:6. "For all of us have become like one who is unclean, and all of our righteous deeds are like a filthy garment. And all of us wither like a leaf, and our iniquities like the wind take us away." Or Job 15:14. "What is man that he would be pure? Or who is born of a woman that he would be righteous?" And now 1 Kings 8:46 that says, "For there is no one who doesn't sin." And finally, we find the answer. Psalms 14:3. "They have all turned aside. Together they have become corrupt. There is no one who does good. No, not even one." And the Bible shows us that this is something we alone cannot change. As Jeremiah 3:23 says, "Can an Ethiopian change his skin, or a leopard its spots? Neither can you do good who are accustomed to doing evil." So the answer to the debate becomes clear. Mankind alone does not have the capacity for goodness. So why do good things happen still? Firstly, our conception of goodness is wholly inadequate when compared to God's standard of goodness. And as God reveals in the scripture, He is the one who empowers us to do good beyond the means of our sin. Furthermore, by His Spirit, He restricts us from our own evil. The Bible clearly illustrates this as during the times of Noah, without the restrictions of God, quote, The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continuously. So if we don't have the capacity for it, why even command us to do good? As we said earlier, by God revealing his standard to us, we can understand our radical depravity and thereby learn the necessity for us to lean and have faith in him to save us from ourselves. Yet, as we see here, Cain didn't heed God's advice. Quote, "Now Cain said to his brother Abel, 'Let's go out to the field.' While they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, 'Where is your brother Abel?' 'I don't know,' he replied. 'Am I my brother's keeper?' The Lord said, 'What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse, driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth.' Cain said to the Lord, 'My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me.' But the Lord said to him, 'Not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over.' Then the Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who found him would kill him." End quote. When Cain murdered Abel, we see a scene reminiscent from chapter 3, where God asks Adam and Eve where they are and what they have done after they ate the fruit. Now he does the same with Cain, but Cain's response is much more revealing. When God asked Cain where Abel is, Cain responded with sarcasm and snideness, saying, "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" This sentence alone gives us insight into Cain and the condition of the human race. In saying this response, Cain has simultaneously spoken to God with disdain and blamed him for what happened to Abel. Just like his father before him, he implied that Cain is not Abel's keeper. God is. Therefore, what happened is God's fault. But the larger and more important revelation of this quote is that it shows Cain knew what he did was wrong. If Cain had no idea it was bad to murder, then he wouldn't have responded with his snide remark. Instead, he would have been perplexed that murder was wrong and openly admitted to it. And so now we see a fundamental truth about mankind. Although we are created with a conscience and sense of morality, we don't act on it. We almost always fail to do the right thing, despite us knowing in our soul what the right thing to do is. In fact, we often betray our conscience so drastically to the point where we lose the ability to distinguish right from wrong. The Bible describes this as, quote, "searing of the conscience," end quote. This is why revelation is so important. It's not enough for humanity to find morality on his own accord. It must be revealed to him by God. And this is why the Bible is so important. If there is to be any standard for morality, any understanding, or any objective truth, we need it. After all, because of the corruption of human nature, we can't rely on ourselves, for we don't know the way of goodness. And that's why the Bible says in Proverbs 3:5, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding." And so, as punishment for the murder of Abel, God sends Cain out into the wilderness. He is cursed forever, for the ground in which he used to grow life has now been spilled with the blood of his dead brother. We then come across what could be a mistranslation in verse 13. Cain tells God that his punishment is too much to bear, showing a second cowardice in Cain that he is unwilling to face the consequences of his actions. But the word used for punishment in the original Hebrew is avoni, which also means sin. Therefore, it can mean that Cain believes his sin is too much to bear, which means he feels guilt over what he has done. Either translation is technically correct, and perhaps they both are correct. Cain goes on further to note that anyone who finds him in the wilderness will kill him. So God then shows his mercy again and puts the mark of Cain on him, declaring that anyone who kills Cain will suffer a vengeance 7-fold. Following the story of Cain and Abel, the Bible follows the pedigree of Cain as his descendants begin to build civilization, culminating in the first ever city founded by Cain, called Enoch. Adam and Eve have another son named Seth, whose lineage we then follow all the way to Noah. Now, the story of the Ark is likely one of the most famous stories in history, but like all things in the Bible, it has a lot of meaning written into it. We'll go into the story in detail, but first I want to take time to show how unique it is. There have been many flood stories throughout history that have become very famous. The most obvious example is the flood story in the Epic of Gilgamesh. In this story, the great gods became annoyed with the noise of humans. Therefore, they planned in secret to send a great flood to wipe out humanity. Utnapishtim was commanded to build a cube boat by the god Enki. Therefore, he began to construct a huge ark with many floors and then loaded his family, craftsmen, treasures, and all animals onto the boat when they were finished. Then, the gods sent their storms and water to engulf the world. So terrifying was this power that even the gods themselves became frightened and retreated back to the heavens. Some gods shrieked at the flood, some wailed and others wept. And after 6 days and 6 nights, the rain stopped. Then, Utnapishtim sends different birds out to find land, and when they don't come back, he sends off his animals and livestock. Then, the god Enlil boards the ship and touches the forehead of Utnapishtim and his wife, and they are granted immortality and godhood status. I wanted to share with you the Babylonian flood story first because at first glance, it's very similar to the flood story of the Bible. In some parts, it can seem nearly indistinguishable. However, despite that, the flood story of the Bible is extremely different from it and much more important and has made a far greater impression on humankind for a reason. It tells us the greater truths of the world and humans in a way that the Epic of Gilgamesh does not. And when compared to the story of Noah, it's inadequate as it fundamentally is based upon arbitrary, immoral gods. So I wanted to include this comparison to help explain its significance not just to us, but to the people who lived at the time it was written. We see that in the story of Noah, the chain of events that leads up to the flood is caused by the evil of humanity. The scripture says, quote, "The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. So the Lord said, I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created, and with them the animals, the birds, the creatures that move along the ground, for I regret that I have made them." But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Verse 5 tells us that humanity had become so wicked that every thought they had was evil continuously. This made God sad as he regretted creating humans. This raises a question though. If God is omnipotent, then how can he have regrets? If he knows all things in the human heart, then shouldn't he have foreseen this? The answer to this question is that sometimes concepts within the Bible are outside our ability to fully comprehend, and therefore it uses words that would most allow us to relate to it. However, in of themselves, they don't reflect a total representation of the meaning. Ancient Hebrews often wrote in exaggerations to help us fully comprehend how extreme a point is. God is always consistent and never changing as Scripture says, so therefore he would never do something against his own will. So now we know what this passage really means, is that the state of mankind was so horrendous that the closest emotion we could understand God felt was regret, or wishing that he had never made man. Therefore, it's no surprise that he is saddened that the human heart only has wickedness. His greatest creation, that he describes himself as very good, now lives only for evil. His purpose for humanity, for the things we could achieve, becomes washed away whenever humanity embraces evil. The God of the Hebrews is a God that becomes sad and regretful when you do evil. Think about that. So God regretted his creation and decided to put it to an end. However, one man and his family found favor with God for being righteous. The Bible continues. Quote, "This is the account of Noah and his family. Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time. He walked faithfully with God. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence. God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people on earth had corrupted their ways. So God said to Noah, I am going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I am surely going to destroy both them and the earth. So make yourself an ark of cypress wood. Make rooms in it and coat it with pitch inside and out." So God tells Noah that he will destroy humanity because of their corruption and violence. And so after, it says, therefore, he instructs Noah to build the ark and tells him how to build it. We'll skip over that part, but it should be noted how many differences there already are between this flood story and the one in the Epic of Gilgamesh. God is not destroying humanity for an arbitrary reason such as annoying him. He's doing it because humanity has become so evil that they have no more good thoughts. The arbitrariness of the Babylonian gods exists because they manifest different attributes of nature, which at that time was already arbitrary. However, God manifests goodness and morality. His chief concern is that humans act in goodness. Therefore, when humanity only acts in evil, their reason for existence ends. There is no purpose for humanity if they cannot be good, and thus, no reason for them to live. But God finds favor with Noah, not because he is a king or a hero like Untitled, but because he is faithful and therefore righteous. He is a good person, therefore his existence has purpose. But this leaves a good question. It says Noah was righteous in all his ways. But if the human condition is evil, how can Noah be righteous in all his ways? Well, as we said before, the capability for mankind to do good came from God himself. As it says here, Noah had faith in God, and so through that faith, God was able to work in Noah and be a righteous man. And so Noah constructed the ark, and as God commanded, filled it with 2 of every animal. We again see that nothing is arbitrary in the Bible. Even the numbers have special meaning. God gives Noah 6 days to fill the ark, and on the 7th he sends his rain and water to flood the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. The number 40 appears time and time again in the Bible, most notably when the Hebrews had to wander the desert for 40 years until they were brought to the Holy Land. Also, the number 7 is used all the time, the 7 days of creation, 7 representing in the Bible perfection or completeness. And so it rained for 40 days and 40 nights, and all human evil was washed away in the endless tides. But the ark stood above the waters, and God remembered Noah. The water continued to swell and rise until it rose above the mountains. All life, birds, beasts, cattle, and all things that swarmed through the earth died. All of mankind, and all whose nostrils was in the nearest breath of life, all on dry land, died. And so then the ark drifted for 150 days, as all life was extinguished and all evil sent from the world. But God remembered Noah and all the cattle that were with him in the ark, and God caused a wind to blow across the earth, and the water subsided. It should be noted that in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the gods became frightened with their power in the flood. They lost control and fled back to the heavens. However, the God of the Bible is always in control. He never fears his own power, and all things that he does are moral. The ark eventually comes to rest on a mountain, and over the course of the next few days, Noah sends out different birds to find land. Now, when Noah sends out these birds, they come back because there's nowhere for them to rest. One time Noah sends out a bird and it comes back with an olive branch in its mouth, signifying that there is now dry land. And for the last time, when Noah sends out the birds, they don't come back. And now he knows it's time. Noah and his family disembark onto the new earth and immediately made an altar to the Lord and burnt sacrifices. And upon this, the Bible speaks some very important verses. Quote, "The Lord smelled the pleasing odor, and the Lord said to himself, 'Never again will I doom the earth because of man, since the devising of man's mind are evil from his youth, nor will I ever again destroy every living being as I have done. So long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease.'" Now, before we move on to this next part, something to consider here is one of the often most asked questions is how can God be a good God if he's willing to kill so many people? Well, we have to remember that mankind's conception is not to the same standard of God's goodness. And if God is perfectly good, and as we see here, he assesses that all of mankind is evil to the point that every thought is evil, and that means God being just and thereby perfectly good is handing down a righteous judgment on mankind. Let's continue. These two verses might be some of the most important to Western civilization because they lay out a fundamental truth of humans and our new state post-flood. The odor that God smelled was the sacrifice that Noah burnt as praise and gratitude towards God, and after that, God promises to never again destroy the earth by flood. But in his promise, he makes it clear again the nature of mankind, stating, quote, "For the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth," end quote. And again affirms the concept we have heard throughout this episode. And no matter how much it offends our modern sensibility, the Bible is clear. Human beings are not good. We'd like to think that humans are naturally good, but we fool ourselves. The idea that humans are naturally good and are corrupted by society is a modern idea that came about during the French Revolution. As we will discuss when we get there, this idea comes from Jean-Jacques Rousseau and his theory of human nature, in which he believes humans are naturally good but are socialized to evil. He is absolutely wrong. This is why parents have to teach their kids to be good as they grow up, because they are naturally inclined to do what is wrong. Even statistically, young children are the most violent humans on Earth. And this is according to studies, like one done by Aaron Anderson and Anne McElroy in the Canadian Globe and Mail, in which they found that the highest rates of violence were actually within toddlers. Goodness has to be taught every day. Evil is much more innate. It's a logical fallacy to claim that humans are naturally good when there is so much evidence against it. But what does God mean when he mentions this? He's not just pointing out that humans are naturally inclined towards evil, but his emphasis on the entrenchment of evil in our hearts shows us that one of the biggest dangers to mankind is ourselves. And we see this truth all the time. Events in the 20th century are a primary example of this. More humans died in this century than any other in history, due to genocide, war, famine, totalitarianism, etc. And it almost culminated in the nuclear destruction of the earth. If humans were more moral in the 20th century, then we would have never come close to nuclear extermination. We would have never have even seen a world war, 2 world wars. And this is our state. But there is hope. The good news is that God does not leave us all to destruction. As we keep on seeing, he provides guidance and redemption so humanity can be good. For example, while all men were wicked, through faith in God, Noah was righteous. And the next few parts of Genesis lead up to this and what has become one of the most widely known stories from the Bible. Quote, "Now the whole world had one language and a common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, 'Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly.' They used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. Then they said, 'Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth.' But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower the people were building. The Lord said, 'If as one speaking the same language they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language so they will not understand each other.' So the Lord scattered them from there over all the earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why it was called Babel, because the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there, the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth." The story of the Tower of Babel is short, but it's filled with meaning. First, all humans speak the same language and therefore come together to build a city and a tower to glorify themselves. The first problem is that these humans, by building a city so they don't have to spread across the world, is directly contrary to what God commanded of Noah and his descendants. He has commanded that humans spread across the world. This is a challenge to him. But not just in one way. The builders of Babel also challenged God by trying to prove they can be like him through creating a tower that reached the heavens. There are many problems with this that reflect the many stories and lessons we have talked about in the past, such as men trying to become like God. So, for time's sake, let's talk about the new lessons presented to us in this story. The men say, quote, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves," end quote. The problem is the intent of their reason for building. These men aspire to do something great for no other reason than to glorify themselves. Therefore, they set out to build a meaningless tower so that they can always be remembered. Now, there's nothing wrong necessarily with wanting to be remembered unless it's for the sole purpose of your self-glorification. When humans aspire to do great things only to elevate themselves, their self-worship only serves to raise them up as idols. The builders of the Tower of Babel sought only to make a name for themselves, not to glorify God. In doing so, they were punished with language and forced to move across the globe. And now their creation is only remembered as being a failure. Those who sought to glorify only themselves are now remembered by no one. Why should we as humans seek to glorify ourselves when we are filled with so much evil? Instead, we should seek to do what glorifies God. This is why so many of the prolific artists of the West are remembered for their works, attempting to honor God. Because if mankind is to have a future, if we are to have a purpose, if we are to ever be saved, to rid ourselves of this evil, to have a reason for our existence, it is because of God. If we are to have aspirations, they must glorify Him. Next time on The West and How We Got Here, we'll be returning to the ancient Greeks and examining the Peloponnesian War, which brought about many of the first political theories of the West. If you guys have any questions about Genesis, feel free to shoot us an email at studios.redflag@gmail.com or follow us on Twitter or YouTube. If you guys enjoyed this episode, please leave a review and a 5-star rating. We would really appreciate it. Today's episode was written and produced by John Douglas and Cameron Fan, with the new addition of Alexandra Grant. The West and How We Got Here is brought to you by Red Flag Studios.